My name is Isabella Russo, though everyone here calls me Bella. At 52, I've learned that life can twist and turn in ways you never anticipate, even when you try your hardest to set it on a steady course. There's a certain irony in that, I suppose. I came to America for love, or what I thought was love, only to find myself tethered to a life that was nothing like the dream I had imagined. I met Jonathan Whittaker during a summer in Rome. He was everything a 20-something Italian girl from Naples could dream of. Tall, handsome, and full of promises. His words sparkled like champagne, effervescent and intoxicating. When he proposed, I thought I was stepping into a fairy tale. Leaving behind my family, my language, and my culture, I followed him to the States, where he ran a successful advertising firm with offices scattered across the globe. It was a whirlwind romance, and I didn't see the storm clouds lurking on the horizon. Lucas was born 2 years into our marriage, and I poured my heart into being a mother. He was my joy, my reason to smile when Jonathan's frequent absences began to chip away at the fantasy I had built around him. My husband was charming, yes, but I soon realized that charm was a tool he used to get what he wanted. From clients, from strangers, and from women who weren't his wife. I knew of his infidelities before Lucas could even walk, but what could I do? I was in a foreign country with a small child. My own family was oceans away. I had no friends to confide in, no resources to lean on. So I stayed. What choice did I have? Jonathan was smart. He never flaunted his indiscretions openly, but they left traces. Lipstick smudged on a collar, perfume on his jacket, credit card receipts from hotels he never mentioned. Each discovery was a dagger to my heart, yet I hid my pain behind carefully painted smiles. For Lucas, I told myself, he needed a stable home, even if that home was built on a foundation of lies. As Lucas grew, I began to see glimpses of a man in the boy. He was protective, even as a child, standing up to bullies on the playground and offering me a tissue when he caught me crying in the kitchen, though I always insisted it was because of the onions. I wanted him to see me as strong, as unshakable. But children have a way of sensing the truth, don't they? Lucas saw through my facade long before I was ready to admit the truth to myself. When Lucas started school, I decided I couldn't be the woman who simply waited for her husband to come home, or not come home. I needed something that was mine, something to remind me of who I was before I became Isabella Whittaker, the perfect wife. I began taking art classes at the local community center, and from there a door opened. Painting turned into selling small canvases, which turned into curating local galleries. By the time Lucas was a teenager, I had my own small business, importing and selling Italian art and antiques. For the first time in years I felt alive. But Jonathan's betrayals never ceased. They became something like background noise, an ever-present hum that I couldn't drown out, no matter how loudly I played the radio. As Lucas grew older, he began to piece together the truth. He noticed the late-night arguments, the cold silences, the way his father's name tightened my jaw whenever it was mentioned. One day, when he was about 15, he asked me directly, "Is Dad seeing someone else?" I froze, unsure of how to answer. But Lucas was no longer a little boy. He could handle the truth, and more importantly, he deserved it. "Yes," I said, my voice breaking. "He's been unfaithful for years." Lucas didn't say anything at first. He simply stood there, his fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tight in a way that reminded me so much of his father it almost hurt. But then he did something I'll never forget. He hugged me. He wrapped his arms around me, holding me as I sobbed into his shoulder, and he said, "You deserve better, Mom." From that moment something shifted between us. Lucas became my confidant, my rock. He was still young, still growing into himself, but he had the soul of a man who understood loyalty and love in a way his father never would. When Jonathan traveled for work, which was often, it was Lucas who kept me company, who helped me carry groceries or fix a leaking faucet. And as he grew into the tall, broad-shouldered man he is now, I couldn't help but feel a quiet pride. He wasn't just my son, he was my greatest achievement. Now, at 22, Lucas is a man in every sense of the word. He's kind and strong, fiercely protective of me in a way that often takes me by surprise. Just last week, he came over to fix the lock on my shop's back door. His jaw tightening as I explained how a customer had tried to take advantage of my kindness. "You shouldn't have to deal with that, Mom," he said, his voice low and firm. And for a moment, as he stood there with his hands on his hips, I saw the man I had always hoped his father would be. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the sun dips low on the horizon, I catch myself wondering what life might have been like if I had made different choices. What if I had stayed in Italy? What if I had left Jonathan the first time he broke my heart? But then Lucas walks through the door with his easy smile and his warm embrace, and I know that no matter how many mistakes I made, at least one thing in my life turned out perfectly. Lucas, my son, my hope, my anchor. For as long as I could remember, I had been Isabella Russo Whitaker, a wife, a mother, a dutiful woman living in a shadow. But everything began to change when Lucas stepped into my life, not just as my son, but as my partner in something I never dared to dream: my freedom. Lucas had always been perceptive, but as he grew older, he saw through the cracks in the facade I had spent years constructing. He saw the hollow silences between Jonathan and me, the way I flinched when Jonathan's name appeared on my phone. But more than that, Lucas saw me, not just as his mother, but as Isabella, a woman with her own hopes, dreams, and vulnerabilities. "Bella," he said one evening, as we sat in the studio that doubled as my sanctuary. I looked up from the canvas, startled by the sound of his voice. He had started calling me that after learning it meant beautiful in Italian, and though it felt strange at first, it warmed something deep inside me. It was as if he were reminding me of the woman I had been before life weighed me down. "You know your work deserves to be seen." I laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "It's seen, Lucas. People come into the shop every day." "I'm serious," he said, leaning forward with the earnestness that made him so much like the man I wished Jonathan had been. "Your paintings are special, Bella. They tell a story. They deserve more than a little corner of town. They deserve a real audience." I paused, the brush suspended in midair. "Lucas, I don't know. Galleries. They're so competitive. Let me handle that." He grinned, his confidence infectious. "I have a friend, Daniel. His dad runs that gallery downtown, the one by the park. I talked to him about you, and he's interested in showcasing your work." The words hit me like a gust of wind, thrilling and terrifying all at once. "You did what?" My voice was incredulous. "Relax, Bella," he said, laughing. "You deserve this. You've spent years putting everyone else first. Now it's your turn." For a moment I couldn't speak. I stared at him, my son who had grown into a man with the heart of a protector. "Lucas," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," he said simply. "I believe in you." The exhibition was a dream. Lucas handled everything. The invitations, the promotion, even the catering. He was tireless, a whirlwind of energy and ideas. He became my PR manager, as he jokingly called himself, though he took the role seriously. Watching him work was like watching someone fight for a cause they believed in with every fiber of their being. And that cause was me. The opening night of the exhibition was magical. My paintings hung in the elegant gallery, illuminated by soft lights that brought every brushstroke to life. Guests milled about, sipping wine and murmuring admiration. I stood at the center, my heart racing, unable to believe it was real. Lucas stayed by my side, introducing me to gallery owners, art critics, and collectors. "See," he whispered at one point, leaning close. "I told you they'd love it." I turned to him, my eyes filling with tears. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he said, his voice soft but firm. "This is where you belong, Bella." From that night on, everything changed. Lucas and I became partners in every sense. He managed the business side of my art, handling contracts and negotiations with a natural charisma that left me in awe. Together we built something beautiful, something that was ours. For the first time in years I felt alive, felt free. But there was still one shadow lingering over my newfound joy. Jonathan. Lucas had made his feelings about his father clear. He tolerated Jonathan's presence when necessary, but their relationship was distant at best. One evening, as we sat in the studio reviewing plans for an upcoming exhibition, Lucas broached the topic I had been avoiding. "Bella," he began, his tone careful. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said, looking up from the sketchbook in my lap. "Why are you still with him?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. I set the sketchbook aside, my heart pounding. "Lucas, it's complicated." "It doesn't have to be," he said gently. "You've built a life of your own now. You don't need him, Bella. You never did." I shook my head, the weight of decades pressing down on me. "It's not just about me, Lucas. There are years of history. promises made. Promises he broke, Lucas said. His voice quiet but firm. Bella, I love you. And I hate seeing you tied to someone who doesn't deserve you. His words struck a chord deep within me. For years I had stayed with Jonathan out of fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of being alone, fear of losing the identity I had once tied so tightly to him. But Lucas was right. I wasn't that woman anymore. I had found my strength, my voice, my independence. And I had Lucas by my side. That night I made a decision. The next morning I filed for divorce. The process wasn't easy. Jonathan didn't take the news well, accusing me of betrayal, of ingratitude. But his words no longer had the power to wound me. With every signature, every court date, I felt the chains that had bound me for so long fall away. Lucas was there every step of the way. He stood beside me in the lawyer's office, offering silent support. When I felt doubt creep in, he reminded me of my worth, of everything I had achieved despite Jonathan's betrayals. You're stronger than you know, Bella, he said one evening as we celebrated the finalization of the divorce. And now you're free. Looking at him, I felt a swell of gratitude and love that I could never put into words. Lucas wasn't just my son. He was my champion, my partner, my anchor. And for the first time in years I felt like I could breathe. The exhibition had been the start of something new, a line drawn between the life I once lived and the one I was now stepping into. It wasn't just the applause of the crowd, the whispered admiration of art critics, or even the sales that followed. It was the feeling of standing in a room filled with light and knowing I belonged there. And it was Lucas who had made that possible. The night the exhibition closed, Lucas and I lingered in the empty gallery long after the last guest had left. The air was quiet now, the hum of conversations replaced by the stillness of achievement. He leaned against a wall, arms crossed, watching as I wandered through the space one last time. You did it, Bella, he said, his voice breaking the silence. You really did it. I turned to him, my heart swelling with gratitude. No, I said softly, walking toward him. We did it. Lucas grinned, a boyish charm lighting up his face that reminded me of the little boy who once ran around our backyard with a stick pretending it was a sword. But now he was a man who had stood by me when I needed him most. I couldn't have done this without you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Lucas, you've given me more than I ever thought I could have. Before I could stop myself, I reached up and kissed him on the cheek, a gesture meant to convey my overwhelming gratitude. But in the quiet intimacy of the moment, the kiss lingered just a second too long. When I pulled back, our eyes met, and something passed between us, something unspoken but undeniable. Lucas's expression softened, his smile fading as his gaze searched mine. I felt a strange warmth rise in my chest, a mix of joy, love, and something else I couldn't quite name. The air between us felt charged, the kind of tension that leaves no room for words. I looked away, suddenly self-conscious, and stepped back. Sorry, I murmured, though I wasn't sure why. Don't be, Lucas said, his voice low. You don't ever have to apologize to me, Bella. The drive home was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I told myself it was nothing, a moment of heightened emotion, of gratitude spilling over. But as the days went on, that moment lingered in my mind, replaying itself in quiet, stolen flashes. Over the weeks that followed, Lucas and I grew closer in ways I hadn't anticipated. With Jonathan out of our lives, the house felt lighter, freer. We spent long evenings together, sometimes working on gallery projects, other times simply talking. Lucas had a way of making me laugh like no one else. His wit sharp but never cruel. He teased me about my morning espresso addiction, and I ribbed him about the way he insisted on taking the longest route to avoid traffic, even if it added 20 minutes to the drive. One evening, as we sat in the living room with the remnants of a pizza box between us, Lucas turned to me, a mischievous glint in his eye. All right, Bella, he said, leaning back on the couch. Confession time. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Confession? Yeah, he said, grinning. Tell me something about yourself I don't know. I laughed, shaking my head. You already know everything about me. Not true, he countered. Come on. One secret. I thought for a moment, tapping my chin dramatically. All right. When I was 16, I snuck into a nightclub with my friends. We got caught, and my father grounded me for a month. Lucas laughed, the sound filling the room like music. Bella Russo, rebel extraordinaire, he said, clapping his hands. Who would have guessed? It was one time, I protested, though I couldn't help but laugh with him. Now it's your turn. He grinned, leaning forward conspiratorially. Fine. When I was 13, I had a crush on my math teacher. I gasped, feigning shock. Lucas Whittaker. That's scandalous. Hey, she was cool, he said, laughing. And she didn't make me feel stupid when I got things wrong. We talked late into the night, trading stories and secrets, our laughter echoing through the house. It was easy, effortless. And in those moments, I felt more like myself than I had in years. It wasn't just the conversations that deepened our bond. It was the quiet moments, too, the times when words weren't needed. Like when Lucas would rest his hand on my shoulder as he passed by, a casual gesture that somehow felt grounding. Or when he hugged me tightly after a particularly successful meeting, lifting me off my feet as I laughed and protested. Those touches, those small acts of closeness, became the highlights of my days. One evening, as we stood in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner, Lucas reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. It was such a simple gesture, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "You're amazing, Bella," he said softly, his voice full of sincerity. "You know that, right?" I looked at him, my heart pounding in my chest. "Lucas, I mean it," he said, his gaze holding mine. "You've been through so much, and you've come out stronger than anyone I know. You're incredible." I didn't know what to say. My throat felt tight, and my eyes stung with unshed tears. Instead of speaking, I stepped closer and hugged him, wrapping my arms around his broad shoulders. He held me tightly, his warmth enveloping me like a blanket. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "For what?" he asked, pulling back just enough to look at me. "For being you," I said, my hand resting against his cheek. "For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." His hand covered mine, his touch gentle but firm. "Always, Bella." The lines between us blurred in those weeks, our bond growing deeper and more intimate. We were more than mother and son, more than partners in a shared dream. We were two people who had found solace and strength in each other, forging a connection that defied easy explanation. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel alone. I felt seen, cherished, and whole. It was a quiet evening in the living room when everything shifted between Lucas and me. The day had been filled with the usual bustle, work, errands, plans for the future. But now, in the soft glow of the lamp and the quiet hum of the city outside, there was only us. We sat close, as we often did, laughing about something trivial that had happened earlier in the day. But as the laughter faded, a different energy settled over us, warm and undeniable. I felt Lucas's gaze linger on me, and when I looked up, the intensity in his eyes caught me off guard. "You're so beautiful," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Lucas." "No," he interrupted gently, shaking his head. "You need to hear this. You've spent so many years thinking you weren't enough. You were always enough, Bella. More than enough." His words left me speechless, a deep warmth spreading through me. Before I could respond, he leaned closer, his hand resting lightly on my cheek. His touch was tentative, as though he were giving me a moment to pull away. But I didn't. When his lips met mine, it was as though the world disappeared. The kiss was soft at first, filled with all the care and respect that Lucas had always shown me. But as the moment deepened, so did the kiss. It wasn't just an expression of gratitude or admiration. It was something far more profound. It was the culmination of everything we had shared. The laughter, the tears, the trust, and the love that had grown quietly between us. I kissed him back, my hands finding their way to his shoulders. It felt natural, as though this was where I was always meant to be. The heat between us was electric, a spark that ignited something I hadn't felt in years, a vibrant, undeniable sense of being alive. When we finally pulled apart, our foreheads rested against each other, and I could feel the rapid rhythm of his breathing matching my own. "Bella," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you." Tears pricked my eyes. "I love you too, Lucas." The next morning, over coffee and pastries, Lucas suggested something that made my heart skip a beat. "Let's go to Italy," he said, his tone light but his eyes serious. "To Italy," I repeated, startled. "Yes," he said, leaning forward. "You've told me so many stories about your life there. Your family, the food, the art, the sunsets over Naples. I want to see it with you. Just us. 2 weeks." The idea was as exhilarating as it was terrifying. Italy was where I had grown up, where my life had begun before I became someone else entirely. To return now, with Lucas, felt like reclaiming a part of myself I had left behind. "Okay," I said, a smile spreading across my face. "Let's do it." Italy was everything I remembered and more. We arrived in Rome, the city that had first brought Jonathan into my life, and yet I felt no shadow of my past there. With Lucas by my side, the cobblestone streets felt brighter, the ancient ruins more alive. We explored the Colosseum and the Vatican, indulged in gelato by the Trevi Fountain, and laughed over plates of pasta in tucked-away trattorias. But it was when we left Rome for the countryside that I felt the true magic of home. In Tuscany, surrounded by rolling vineyards and golden hills, Lucas and I found a rhythm that felt like it had always been ours. Mornings were spent wandering through markets, picking out fresh bread and ripe peaches. Afternoons were for lazy drives, stopping to take in breathtaking views or share a quiet moment beneath the shade of an olive tree. One evening, as the sun set over the hills, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Lucas pulled me close. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "I think this is where you were always meant to be." "And you?" I asked, looking up at him. "Wherever you are, Bella," he said, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "That's where I'm meant to be." In that moment I knew what I wanted. The idea to move back to Italy didn't come all at once. It started as a passing thought, a wistful what if, as we stood in the shadow of Florence's Duomo or wandered through the Amalfi Coast's colorful streets. But by the end of the trip, it was a certainty. Lucas was the one to say it aloud first, over a bottle of wine on our last night in Italy. "We don't have to go back, you know," he said. His tone casual but his meaning anything but. I looked at him, my heart racing. "You mean move here?" "Why not?" he said, his eyes lighting up. "This is where you're happiest, Bella. Can see it. And I love it here too. We could build a life here. A real life, just the two of us." The thought was intoxicating. A fresh start in the place that had shaped me, with Lucas by my side. "Let's do it," I said, my voice firm with conviction. Within a year we had made the leap. We found a charming villa on the outskirts of Florence, surrounded by cypress trees and the scent of lavender. Life in Italy was everything I had dreamed it would be. Lucas and I worked together, my art finding a new audience among the galleries and markets of Florence, while he managed the logistics with his characteristic charm and efficiency. But it wasn't just the work. It was the way we lived. The long, leisurely dinners under the stars, the mornings spent sipping espresso on the terrace, the way Lucas would twirl me around the kitchen as we cooked. I felt younger than I had in decades, as though I had shed the weight of my past and stepped fully into the woman I was always meant to be. Lucas had a way of looking at me that made me feel beautiful, cherished, and alive. Every day, I thanked whatever twist of fate had brought us to this point. Lucas wasn't just my son, he was my partner, my love, my everything. And in the hills of Italy, with the sun warming my skin and Lucas's laughter ringing through the air, I knew without a doubt that life, our life, was just beginning.